Jesus is the master of the metaphor. In this gospel passage, he's using birth as a metaphor to explain how we're supposed to transition in this life. Nicodemus is misunderstanding the metaphor, is trying to take it literally, and I really believe Nicodemus is playing dumb by asking the obvious question that you can't be reborn in the same physical sense as when we were first born. Nicodemus is correct. The logistics don't add up. You can't be born that way, but that isn't what Jesus is saying. Jesus does not say born again or reborn. He simply says one must be born from above if they're going to ever to be able to see the kingdom of God. However, this notion of birth, used as a metaphor, is really quite appropriate. Like Nicodemus, we human beings have a tendency of thinking of birth in only one context, our physical being born into this world. We think of our birth as a one-time deal, which in that sense, in that context, it is a one-time deal. However, birth is a process, marking the transition from one stage of life to another. And at some level, in some capacity, we're born multiple times in different capacities throughout our lives. So we know enough about our biology to know that our physical birth was not our actual beginning. So we exist a good 9 months before our actual birth. Spiritually speaking, we believe that our souls are eternal. So we exist in some capacity even before our conception. But that's not to say that we don't go through a number of births as we grow in our spiritual lives. Not all species are born. Some are hatched. Some go through metamorphosis transitions, and all of that kind of demonstrates the evolutionary process where things drastically change, but at the same time, they're also staying the same. If you consider a caterpillar being transitioned into a butterfly, and you look at the before and after effects, it's hard to imagine it's the same creature, but the DNA is still the same. The same is true for us. We may go through a number of spiritual transitions, growing immensely in the course of our lives, hopefully at least, but the core of who we are still remains the same, as sparks of the divine. It's important for us to kind of consider this metaphor because it explains a little bit of what the process is like, because without considering that, we might become frustrated. People sometimes ask me, when did I decide to become a priest? And I usually laugh because I never felt that it was a decision that I made consciously. Rather, I felt that I was kind of born, I shouldn't say born into the priesthood, but rather I was born out of my prior life. I really wanted to make the corporate world work. I wanted to be an engineer. But as I explored things, I realized those options were being exhausted. And after you exhaust enough options, pretty soon it seems like your womb, your environment, the place you thought home, becomes so constricted, it actually spits you out. Just like a mother's body basically says to, darling, it's time for you to go. You can't stay here. And the reality is that's how we often go through our lives. At some point, we often think it's our choice, that I chose this or I chose that. But if we reflect on it, many times we'll discover that the environment changed on us. We reached a certain limitation of that particular environment, and for us to continue to survive, to thrive, we need to be expelled from that environment to go into a new environment. Radically different. Sometimes the freedom, sometimes the transition would scare us. We'd come out kicking and screaming. But God also provided new resources for us to grow in that new and wonderful environment, something necessary for our survival and our evolution. We are in a phase in our church where things seem to be constricted. Perhaps even old models of way of being don't seem to fit anymore. Used to be parish life was the center of a family's life. Everybody went to a Catholic school. You lived in a neighborhood. The place was full. Your social lives surrounded around the events of the parish. All that's pretty much gone. But people still have lives of faith. So that old way of being seems like it doesn't fit anymore. And to some degree, it's perhaps expelling us, saying, you can't stay here, you need to evolve in new ways. We may come out kicking and screaming, but in the end, it'll probably be a benchmark that marks a great transition in our lives.